Chapter 4. Mrs. Drake, a naturally courageous woman, found herself unnerved by the telegram and the sudden separation from her husband and daughter, Laura. She collapsed into an armchair on the steamer, wondering why she didn't turn back with her husband and feeling as though this was worse than death. Mr. Drake is in great trouble, she thought. Why didn't I sacrifice everything and share his misfortunes? Laura is so noble to go ashore with her father. She's always happiest when she forgets herself and does for others. Mrs. Drake sobbed as if her loved ones had been entombed. Kimberly, her daughter, held her hand tenderly and spoke words of comfort. Cheer up, Mother. Everything will be all right. Father can take Mr. Lee to Drakeville. To see what, child? Men misled and on strike with the mills all shut down. It means much trouble and perhaps disaster for the Drakes. Oh, no, Mother. Everything will be all right. Let's go up on deck. Alfonso led his mother, and Marcellus took Kimberly up among the passengers. They arrived just in time to see white handkerchiefs fluttering on the pier. Marcellus used his field glass to distinguish Colonel Drake and Laura, and tears filled Mrs. Drake's eyes once again. European steamers always left on time, waiting for neither prince nor peasant. A carriage with foaming horses arrived on the pier as the tug pulled the steamer out onto the Hudson. The carriage's only occupant was an English government agent bearing a special message from the British ambassador in Washington to Downing Street in London. "Now what's to be done?" the British agent sharply inquired. £2, sir, and we will put you and your luggage aboard," shouted an English sailor. "Agreed," said the agent. To the surprise of everyone on the pier, two robust sailors pulled with all their might, each winning a sovereign, as they put the belated agent on board the Majestic. This race for a passage caught Mrs. Drake's eye. As the little boat approached, she initially believed it might be her husband returning. However, upon the English agent's arrival, she grabbed Alfonso's arm and exclaimed, "Quickly, my son, let's go to the boat. I'll go back to Mr. Drake." "No, no," Alfonso replied. "Mother, look, the little boat is already heading back to the dock." Later on, the purser delivered an envelope to Mrs. Drake containing their steamer tickets and a purse of gold that the colonel had thoughtfully sent through the English agent. Upon further inspection of the envelope, Mrs. Drake discovered the colonel's personal card with a few hastily scribbled words on the back. "Cheer up, everybody. Glad 4 of our party are on board. Enjoy yourselves. Laura sends love. Later we will join you in London, perhaps. God bless you all. R.H." Mrs. Drake's face soon lit up with joy as she began to notice the people around her and realized that she was actually on board the ship. Traveling abroad had been her lifelong dream, and having Alfonso and Kimberly by her side comforted her. "Mrs. Drake," Marcellus said, "look at the magnificent buildings that outline Broadway, such as the Western Union Telegraph Building, the Equitable Building, the granite offices of the Standard Oil Company, the Post Office, and the imposing Produce Exchange with its projecting galley prows. Above its long series of beautiful arches of terracotta rise a tall campanile and liberty pole from which floats the Stars and Stripes." Marcellus's eyes shone with brilliance, and his voice filled with patriotism as he spoke of his adopted flag. "Kimberly, behold our glorious flag that flies over America's greatest financial and commercial city. I love the Stars and Stripes as much as Italy's flag. Every year, over 30,000 vessels arrive and depart from this harbor. New York is America's great gateway for immigrants. In a single year, nearly 500,000 people land at Castle Garden. Sections of New York are known as Germany, Italy, China, Africa, and Judea. The city's Hebrew population alone numbers upwards of 100,000 and has nearly 50 synagogues and as many millionaires. The Battery Park, with its trees, lawns, and promenades along the seawall, is a beautiful sight to behold. The settees are always crowded with people enjoying the magnificent marine views before them. Alfonso pointed to the suspension or Brooklyn Bridge, beneath which vessels sailed on the East River. Its enormous cables looked like small ropes sustaining a vast traffic of cars, vehicles, and pedestrians. To the right of the steamer's track on Bedloe's Island stands Bartholdi's Liberty, Enlightening the World, the largest bronze statue on the globe. From a small guidebook of New York, Kimberly read aloud that the Bartholdi statue and its pedestal cost $1 million, and that the statue was presented by the French people to the people of the United States. The Head of Liberty is higher than the tall steeple of Trinity Church, which is 300 feet high, or twice that of the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 ancient wonders. "Look," said Kimberly, "at the uplifted right hand holding an electric torch." The statue stood proudly, facing the entrance from Europe, welcoming all to America. Marcellus pointed out the resemblance to Bartholdi's mother in the statue's face, acknowledging the influence of his mother's encouragement on his success. Mrs. Drake added that many great men have had splendid mothers. As the ship sailed down the Narrows, many on deck thought of their loved ones at home and wondered if they would return to America. The historic forts on either side were now worthless, but still stood as a reminder of the past. The ship left behind the Sandy Hook lighthouse, the low shores and purple mountains of New Jersey, heading towards its destination at full speed. The gong for lunch was sounded, and Alfonso led the way below, accompanied by his mother and friends. Colonel Drake had arranged for his family to sit at the captain's table. As they entered the grand dining room, they were greeted by the sight of 300 passengers, all with their own heart histories and ambitions. Everyone was talking at the same time, and Mrs. Drake observed the new faces around her. The sea was smooth, and the scene was animating. The passengers were all looking at each other, wondering who they might be. The young men were more interested in the pretty faces than the English luncheon, and Mrs. Drake struggled with her appetite. Amidship, the movement of the boat was minimal, and the dining saloon was filled with the fragrance of choice flowers. As the ship sailed towards America, the passengers were filled with excitement and anticipation for the journey ahead. The Corinthian columns were fluted and embossed, while the walls and ceiling boasted tints of ivory and gold. Artistic panels of tritons and nymphs abounded, and the ports were fitted with stained glass shutters emblazoned with the arms of cities and states across Europe and America. Electric lights behind the glass illuminated the designs both day and night. Surmounting this richly appointed saloon was a dome of artistic creation, its stained glass of soft tints sparkling in the warm sunlight and shedding a kaleidoscope of color and design over the merry company of passengers. Mirrors and the gentle rolling of the steamer multiplied and enlarged the gorgeous colorings and perplexing designs. In the midst of this new life aboard ship, so novel and so beautiful, Mrs. Drake would have been happy had her overworked husband and Laura sat beside her at the table. But very little of this life is enjoyed without the unwelcome flies that spoil the precious ointment. After lunch, Alfonso and his friends had time to examine the great steamer that would take them to the Old World. When his party hurriedly entered the dining saloon, they entirely overlooked the grand staircase. How wide and roomy it was, and how beautifully carved and finished, especially the balustrade and newel posts, the whole being built of selected white oak, which mellows with age and will assume a richer hue like the wainscoting in the famous old English abbeys and manor houses. Again, the Drake party was on deck, final words hastily written and placed in the steamer's mailbag, with a sailor standing ready to pass it over the ship's side to the pilot's little boat, waiting for orders to cut loose from the Majestic. The engines slacked their speed, the pilot bade the officers goodbye, and accompanied the mailbag to his trusted schooner. No. 66 was painted in black full length on the pilot's big white sail. All the passenger steamers which enter or leave New York must take these brave and alert pilots as guides in and out of the ever-changing harbor channels. The gong in the engine rooms signaled full speed again, and the live, escaping steam was turned through the triple expansion engines, and the Majestic gathered her full strength for a powerful effort, a record-breaking passage to Queenstown. The life on board the transatlantic ferry was decidedly English, and Mrs. Drake closely studied the courtesies and requirements. She soon came to like the ship's discipline and matter-of-fact customs. The young people, some newly married, and some new acquaintances like Marcellus and Kimberly, had moved their steamer chairs on the deck to watch the return of the pilot's boat. Loving letters were read, the leaves of the latest magazines were cut, and many words were exchanged before the big 6-6 disappeared entirely with the sun that set in gold and purple over the low New England shores. Quite apart from the young people sat Mrs. Drake and Alfonso. They talked earnestly about the ill-timed strike of the millmen at home. "Why did the men strike at the very time when father wanted his mills to glow with activity?" queried Mrs. Drake. "Oh, mother," said Alfonso, That is part of labor's stock in trade. Some labor organizations believe that the end justifies the means. Our men were probably informed of father's plans, and strikes are often timed to put capital at a disadvantage and force a quick surrender to labor's demands. Like begets like, the college professor told us when he lectured on Darwin. Darwin emphasized this fundamental principle in nature. See, Mother, how this labor agitation works. Labor organizations multiply and become aggressive, and so capital organizes in self-defense. One day, our professor told the class that he preferred citizenship in a government controlled by intelligent capital to the insecurity and uncertainty of ignorant labor in power. The professor believed the British form of government was more stable than that of republics. Usually, the more values a person possesses, the more they desire stable government. Labor has little capital and often takes risks, but labor cannot afford to take chances when there are hungry mouths to feed. Labor with little or no surplus should act reasonably and conservatively, or families suffer. Mrs. Drake listened to her son's comments on capital and labor, but her independence asserted itself, and she said, "Alfonso, I hope Mr. Drake will insist on his rights at Drakeville." "Very likely he will, Mother, as he is that kind of man, and the New England independence born in him is sure to assert itself." For a few moments, neither mother nor son spoke. Suddenly both were awakened from their reveries by the call for dinner. The waters were still smooth, and the ocean breezes had sharpened appetites, so the grand staircase was crowded with a happy throng, most of whom were eager for their first dinner aboard ship. The Drakes were delighted to find Captain Morgan already at the table. Captain Morgan had learned that wealth is power. His own ship had cost $1 million or more, and England's millions enabled his government to control the globe. Not only was he aware that capital and brains guided most human events, but he also possessed the instincts of a gentleman and was a true Briton. His ancestors had followed the sea for generations, and some had served in the navy, while others like himself had spent long lives in the commercial marine. In Kimberley's eyes, Captain Morgan was an ideal hero of the sea. He was over 6 feet tall and weighed not less than 250 pounds. His face was round and bronzed by the exposure of over 300 ocean passages. His closely cropped grey hair and beard, and his blue eyes and shapely hands suggested inbred qualities. It was easy to see that he possessed rare traits of character, including loyalty to the great trusts confided to him. Safety of ship, passengers, and cargo were words often repeated, whether the skies above him were blue or black. "We shall miss your husband's presence aboard ship," said Captain Morgan to Mrs. Drake. "Nowadays, managers of big enterprises on land face just as many challenges as we do on the Atlantic." "That's true," replied Mrs. Drake. "Financial disturbances are just as difficult to predict and control." "It's fortunate that the colonel was able to return and take command of his business," said the captain. "You need not worry about anything at home or on the Majestic. With your permission, Colonel Drake's family shall be under my care for the voyage. Please let me know if you need anything." "Thank you," said Alfonso, relieved by the captain's kindness. "Captain, do you think we'll have a smooth voyage?" "I hope so, for the sake of those on their first voyage," said the captain. "But we never promise good weather. Smooth waters are boring for us sailors, but it's lucky for our passengers if we have a few fair days as we depart and arrive. With gentle breezes, passengers can adjust to the ship's movements, and later, brisk winds are welcomed." "Captain, do you have a cure for seasickness?" asked Mrs. Drake. "Yes," he replied. "Exercise on the ship, eat wisely, conserve your energy, and make peace with the sea. Don't fight the ship's movements, but go with the flow. Forget that you're on a ship and you'll be fine." "Captain, will we arrive in the Mersey by Monday evening?" asked Kimberley. "If all goes well, Monday or Tuesday," said the captain, before excusing himself to return to his duties on the bridge. "He's a gallant old sea dog," said Mrs. Drake. "We're in good hands with him." "He's probably married to his ship," said Kimberley. The passengers went about their activities as the winds picked up and the skies grew dark. Most went below deck, while a few brave souls remained outside, bundled up in warm clothes. They walked the deck for the usual half-hour, mostly businessmen who were used to ocean travel. The salty sailors were well acquainted with the dampened planks, overcast heavens, and tumultuous waters. just as the city dwellers are accustomed to concrete walkways and hotel hallways.